The first step towards freedom. The quaint town of Willowmere was a tapestry of serenity, nestled between lush green hills and a lazy, winding river. The streets were cobblestoned, the air was fragrant with blooming jasmine, and the locals greeted each other with warmth that was as comforting as the morning sun. But for Eliza, the charm of her town had long been overshadowed by the oppressive shadow of her husband, Marcus. Marcus was the town's well-respected entrepreneur, a man with wealth, influence, and a temper hidden behind a facade of charm. To the outside world, he was the perfect husband, attentive, generous, and loving. But behind the closed doors of their sprawling estate, Marcus revealed a different side, one that left Eliza feeling small, frightened, and utterly trapped. Eliza had always been a dreamer. As a child, she'd spend hours in her grandmother's bakery, her tiny hands covered in flour, as she learned to knead dough and decorate cakes. She dreamt of one day owning her own bakery, a place where she could create edible masterpieces and bring joy to others. But those dreams felt like a lifetime ago, buried under years of emotional manipulation and the stifling control of Marcus. Tonight was no different. As Eliza stood in the kitchen, her hands trembling while she washed dishes, Marcus's voice echoed in her ears, sharp and biting. "Do you even understand how much I sacrificed for you?" he had hissed earlier that evening, slamming his glass of whiskey onto the table. "You're nothing without me. Remember that." The words replayed in her mind like a cruel mantra. Her reflection in the kitchen window showed a woman she barely recognized, her eyes dull, her once vibrant spirit dimmed. She bit her lip to hold back tears, the weight of her despair almost too much to bear. But tonight, something felt different. As Marcus's car roared out of the driveway for his usual Thursday night card game, the oppressive silence that followed was not the heavy, suffocating kind she had grown accustomed to. Instead, it carried a faint whisper of possibility, like the first breath of air after being submerged for too long. Eliza glanced at the clock. She had a few hours before Marcus returned. Her gaze fell on the wooden box tucked away in the corner of the kitchen, a box she hadn't opened in years. Inside were her grandmother's handwritten recipes, yellowed with age but filled with the magic of her childhood. Her heart raced as she retrieved the box and opened it. The first recipe she pulled out was for a strawberry tart, her grandmother's signature dessert. As her fingers traced the familiar script, memories of laughter and the scent of freshly baked pastries flooded her mind. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to smile. Eliza's hands moved almost instinctively as she gathered ingredients. Flour dusted the counter, butter softened under her touch, and the sweet aroma of strawberries filled the air. With each step, she felt a flicker of her old self returning, a woman who once believed in her dreams, who wasn't defined by fear. As the tart baked, Eliza leaned against the counter and stared out the window. The stars seemed brighter tonight, as if they were silently cheering her on. She thought of her grandmother's words, spoken during one of their many baking sessions. Sometimes, the simplest acts of creation can remind you who you are. The timer buzzed, pulling her from her reverie. Eliza removed the tart from the oven, its golden crust and vibrant filling a testament to her effort. She placed it on the counter to cool and sat down at the table, her heart a mixture of pride and trepidation. For years, Marcus had told her she was incapable of achieving anything on her own. But as she looked at the tart, she felt a spark of defiance ignite within her. If she could make this, what else was she capable of? The sound of her phone vibrating interrupted her thoughts. She hesitated before picking it up, her pulse quickening as she saw the message from an unknown number. "If you need a way out, there's a place for you. Call me." Eliza's fingers trembled as she reread the message. It was from Leah, an old friend she hadn't spoken to in years. Leah had once been her closest confidant, a beacon of light during the early days of her marriage. But as Marcus tightened his grip on Eliza's life, he had slowly isolated her from everyone who cared about her. The message felt like a lifeline. For years, she had convinced herself that leaving Marcus was impossible, that the risk was too great, the unknown too terrifying. But now, as she sat in the warm glow of her kitchen, the scent of her grandmother's tart filling the air, she dared to consider a different future. Taking a deep breath, Eliza replied, "I think I'm ready." The response came almost immediately. "Good. Be ready by midnight. I'll be there." Eliza set her phone down, her heart pounding. Midnight. She had less than 2 hours to pack her life into a small bag and leave behind everything she had known. The thought was terrifying, but the alternative, staying in the suffocating grip of Marcus's control, was even more so. She moved quickly, gathering essentials, a few changes of clothes, her grandmother's recipe box, and a worn photo of her parents. Each item felt like a piece of herself, fragments of a life she was determined to reclaim. As the clock struck midnight, Eliza stood by the window, her bag at her feet. The headlights of a car appeared in the distance, growing brighter as they approached her driveway. Her breath caught in her throat as the car stopped, and Leah stepped out, her expression a mixture of relief and determination. "Let's go," Leah said, her voice firm but kind. Eliza nodded, her grip tightening on the bag. She didn't look back as she climbed into the car, the weight of her decision pressing down on her chest. The house, once a symbol of her imprisonment, disappeared into the night as Leah drove away. For the first time in years, Eliza allowed herself to hope. She didn't know what awaited her, but she knew one thing for certain: she was free. And as the miles stretched between her and the life she was leaving behind, she felt the faintest flicker of something she hadn't felt in years: possibility. The road to uncertainty. The car sped down the winding country road, its headlights slicing through the thick darkness of the night. The rhythmic hum of the engine was the only sound in the stillness, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside Eliza's mind. She clutched her bag tightly, her knuckles white against the worn leather. Beside her, Leah's calm demeanor was a soothing presence, but even her old friend's steady confidence couldn't quiet the tempest of thoughts racing through Eliza's head. What's going to happen now? Eliza finally broke the silence, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Leah glanced at her briefly before returning her focus to the road. "First, we're getting you somewhere safe," she said firmly. "A place where Marcus can't reach you. After that, we'll figure out the rest, one step at a time." The simplicity of Leah's plan was both reassuring and daunting. For years, Eliza's life had been meticulously controlled, every decision dictated by Marcus's whims. Now, the idea of taking control of her own future felt as exhilarating as it was terrifying. They drove for what felt like hours, the landscape shifting from familiar farmlands to unfamiliar wooded terrain. Eliza's mind wandered as she stared out the window, the dark silhouettes of trees blurring into a single endless line. Memories of Marcus flooded her thoughts. His sharp words, his cold gaze, the way he always made her feel small, insignificant. "You're nothing without me." The words echoed in her head, a cruel refrain she had heard so many times that it had almost become a part of her identity. But tonight, for the first time, she allowed herself to question them. What if Marcus was wrong? What if she could be someone, without him? The thought was both terrifying and liberating. As the car rounded a bend, the headlights illuminated a small cabin nestled among the trees. It was modest and unassuming, its wooden exterior blending seamlessly with the surrounding forest. Leah parked the car and turned to Eliza, her expression softening. "This is it," she said. "It's not much, but it's safe. No one knows about this place except me." Eliza nodded, her heart pounding as she stepped out of the car. The night air was crisp and carried the faint scent of pine and damp earth. The cabin's porch light flickered faintly, casting long shadows that danced across the wooden steps. Leah unlocked the door and ushered Eliza inside. The interior was simple but cozy, with a small kitchenette, a worn couch, and a single bedroom tucked away in the corner. The walls were adorned with faded photographs and trinkets, remnants of a life long past. "You'll have everything you need here," Leah said, setting down a bag of groceries she had brought along. There's food in the kitchen, clean clothes in the bedroom closet, and a phone with a new number. If you need anything, call me." Eliza nodded again, her throat tight with emotion. The reality of her situation was beginning to sink in. She had left everything behind. Her home, her belongings, her old life. The enormity of it all was overwhelming. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Leah smiled and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to thank me," she said. "Just promise me you'll give yourself a chance to start over, to find yourself again." The words struck a chord deep within Eliza. She had spent so long living in fear, in submission, that the idea of starting over felt almost foreign. But as she looked around the small cabin, she felt the faintest flicker of hope, a tiny ember waiting to be fanned into a flame. After Leah left, Eliza sat alone in the quiet cabin. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't oppressive like the silence of Marcus's house. It was a different kind of silence, peaceful, contemplative. She unpacked her bag slowly, placing her few belongings carefully in their new home. The last item she pulled out was her grandmother's recipe box. She placed it on the kitchen counter and stared at it for a long moment. The box was more than just a collection of recipes. It was a symbol of the life she had once dreamed of, a life that felt impossibly out of reach. But maybe it wasn't impossible. Maybe, just maybe, she could find her way back to the person she used to be. The woman who loved baking, who dreamed of opening her own bakery, who believed in herself. The thought gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She opened the box and pulled out a recipe card at random. It was for her grandmother's cinnamon rolls, a family favorite that she hadn't made in over a decade. Without hesitation, Eliza began gathering ingredients from the kitchen. The act of baking felt natural, almost instinctive, as if her hands remembered what her heart had forgotten. She mixed the dough, rolled it out, and spread it with butter, sugar, and cinnamon. As the rolls baked, the warm, sweet aroma filled the cabin, wrapping her in a comforting embrace. When the rolls were done, Eliza sat at the small kitchen table and took her first bite. The taste was like a memory, a connection to a time when she was happy, when she believed in herself. Tears filled her eyes as she finished the roll. It wasn't just the taste that moved her, it was what it represented. It was proof that she could create something beautiful, something meaningful, even in the midst of chaos and uncertainty. For the first time in years, Eliza allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a better future. She didn't know what that future would look like, but she knew one thing for certain. She was ready to fight for it. And as the first rays of dawn broke through the trees, casting a warm glow over the cabin, Eliza felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. It wasn't just the beginning of a new day. It was the beginning of a new life. Shadows of the past. The morning sun streamed through the cabin's small windows, casting golden streaks on the worn wooden floor. Eliza stood by the counter, her hands busy cleaning up the remnants of her late-night baking session. The sweet scent of cinnamon rolls lingered in the air, a comforting reminder of her first steps toward reclaiming herself. But even as she moved about the kitchen, a weight hung over her. The reality of her situation was beginning to set in. She had left Marcus, a man who wielded influence and power like weapons. It wouldn't take him long to notice her absence, and when he did, Eliza knew he would come looking. The question that gnawed at her now was whether she was truly ready to face what came next. She tried to focus on the immediate tasks. The cinnamon rolls sat neatly on a plate, and she wrapped a few in foil, a habit from years ago when she'd bake for her friends. Leah had said she'd stop by later, and Eliza wanted to thank her with something sweet. The thought of her old friend made Eliza pause. Leah had been unwavering in her support, and yet Eliza couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. She had pushed Leah away during the worst years with Marcus, isolating herself in a futile attempt to protect both of them from his wrath. Eliza sighed and sat down at the small kitchen table. The quiet of the cabin was both a blessing and a curse. It gave her space to think, but it also amplified the echoes of her past. Marcus's voice, his scathing remarks, his icy indifference. She reached for her grandmother's recipe box, seeking solace in the familiar. Pulling out another card, she found a recipe for honeyed almond cake. The sight of the handwriting made her smile, albeit faintly. "You can do this," she whispered to herself. "You're stronger than he thinks." The sound of a car crunching on the gravel driveway snapped her out of her thoughts. Her heart leaped into her throat. For a moment, panic gripped her. Had Marcus found her already? She hesitated, her pulse racing as she peeked out the window. It was Leah. Relief flooded through her as she opened the door to greet her friend. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Leah said with a wry smile, holding up a bag of groceries. "I brought supplies. Figured you'd need more than flour and sugar." Eliza chuckled nervously, stepping aside to let Leah in. "You scared me for a moment. I thought." Leah's face softened. "You thought it was him." She set the bag down on the counter and placed a reassuring hand on Eliza's shoulder. "He doesn't know you're here. I've taken care of that." Eliza nodded, but her unease lingered. She helped Leah unpack the groceries, grateful for the company. As they worked, Leah glanced at the plate of cinnamon rolls and grinned. "Is this your way of saying thank you? Because if it is, I accept." The light-hearted moment eased some of Eliza's tension. They sat together at the table, sipping tea and sharing stories from their past. Leah talked about her work with a local women's shelter, how she had seen women like Eliza rebuild their lives and find happiness again. Her words were both comforting and inspiring, and Eliza found herself daring to hope. But the peace was short-lived. As they talked, a loud, sharp knock echoed through the cabin. Both women froze. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Leah rose quickly, motioning for Eliza to stay put. She opened the door just a crack, enough to see who was outside. Eliza's breath caught as she heard Leah's voice, steady but firm. "Can I help you?" The response was muffled, but the deep, authoritative tone was unmistakable. "Marcus." Eliza's stomach twisted into knots. She had prepared herself for this moment, but now that it was here, she felt paralyzed. Leah stepped outside, closing the door behind her, and Eliza pressed herself against the wall, straining to hear their conversation. "I know she's here," Marcus said, his voice cold and deliberate. "She left me a note, but she doesn't know what's best for her. I'm here to take her home." Leah's voice was calm but unyielding. "Eliza isn't here, Marcus. And even if she were, you have no right to force her to go anywhere." Marcus laughed, a chilling sound that sent shivers down Eliza's spine. "You're protecting her, aren't you? You've always been a bad influence." "She's my wife, Leah. She belongs with me." Leah didn't back down. "She's not your property, Marcus. If she wants to leave, that's her choice." The sound of heavy footsteps on the porch made Eliza's heart race. She peeked through the curtains and saw Marcus towering over Leah, his face a mask of anger. He leaned in close to her friend, his voice low and menacing. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. Stay out of this, Leah, or you'll regret it." Leah stood her ground, her voice unwavering. "That sounds like a threat, Marcus. And if it is, I'll have the police here before you can blink." The tension was palpable, the silence stretching for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Marcus stepped back, his expression dark. "This isn't over," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "She can't hide forever." Eliza held her breath as she watched Marcus retreat to his car and drive away. Leah came back inside, her face calm but her eyes filled with worry. "Are you okay?" she asked, placing a hand on Eliza's arm. Eliza nodded, though her body trembled. "He's not going to stop, is he?" Leah sighed. "Probably not. But you're not alone in this. We'll figure it out." The weight of Marcus's presence lingered long after he was gone. Eliza spent the rest of the day in a haze, her thoughts a whirlwind of fear and determination. She couldn't go back to him. She wouldn't. But she also knew that staying hidden wasn't a long-term solution. As night fell, Eliza sat by the window, staring out at the dark forest. She thought about the woman she used to be and the woman she wanted to become. She thought about her grandmother's bakery, the joy of creating something beautiful, and the strength it took to leave. And for the first time, she felt a spark of defiance burn within her. Marcus had come looking for her, but he hadn't found her. She wasn't the scared, submissive woman he had tried to break. She was stronger than that, stronger than he could ever imagine. As the stars appeared in the night sky, Eliza made a silent promise to herself. She wouldn't just survive, she would thrive. And no matter what Marcus tried, he wouldn't take her freedom away. This was her fight now, and she was ready to face whatever came next. The sparks of defiance. As the stars dotted the velvet sky above the cabin, Eliza remained seated by the window, her mind racing. The confrontation with Marcus lingered like a bitter taste, but Leah's unwavering support gave her hope. For years, Marcus had instilled fear in her, controlling her every decision, making her doubt her worth. But tonight, watching Leah stand her ground, Eliza felt something shift, a spark of defiance she hadn't felt in years. The cabin was silent except for the soft hum of the wind through the trees. Eliza's thoughts flickered back to Marcus's threat. His words had been sharp, meant to cut and intimidate, but for the first time, they didn't break her. Instead, they fueled something within her, a simmering determination to stand up for herself. Leah entered the room, her face calm, but her shoulders tense. She carried a mug of tea and placed it on the table in front of Eliza. "How are you holding up?" Leah asked, sitting across from her. Her voice was gentle, but her eyes were sharp, scanning Eliza's face for any sign of faltering. Eliza took a deep breath, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "I'm scared," she admitted, "but I'm also tired. Tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of feeling like I don't deserve to live my own life." Leah nodded, her expression softening. "That's a good place to start," she said. "Admitting you're tired means you're ready to change things. You're ready to fight." Eliza looked out the window again, her gaze fixed on the shadowy forest. "But what does fighting look like for me?" she asked. "I spent so long letting Marcus decide everything. I don't even know where to begin." Leah leaned forward, her voice firm but kind. "Fighting doesn't have to mean standing face to face with him right now. It means reclaiming the pieces of yourself he tried to take. It means building a life where he has no place." The words resonated with Eliza. She thought of the recipe box sitting on the counter, the cinnamon rolls she had baked earlier, and the fleeting sense of joy they had brought her. Maybe fighting didn't mean confrontation. Maybe it meant rebuilding herself piece by piece, rediscovering the parts of her that Marcus had tried to erase. "I want to bake again," Eliza said suddenly, her voice steady. "I want to find that part of me that I thought was gone." Leah's smile was warm, encouraging. "Then that's exactly what you'll do." The next morning, Eliza woke to the sound of birds chirping outside her window. The sunlight streamed in, casting golden patterns on the wooden floor. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of purpose. She dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen, where Leah was already brewing coffee. "Good morning." Leah greeted her with a smile. "What's the plan for today?" Eliza hesitated for only a moment before answering. "I'm going to bake, and I want to do it right. I need to find a way to share it, to start building something." Leah raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Are you thinking about starting a business?" Eliza shrugged, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Maybe not right away, but I need to start somewhere. I can't just bake for myself. I want to see people enjoy it, like they used to." Leah's expression brightened. "There's a farmer's market in town every Saturday. I know the woman who runs it. She's always looking for new vendors. Maybe I can get you a spot." The idea made Eliza's heart race. It was bold, almost reckless, but it felt right. She nodded, the spark of defiance growing stronger. "Let's do it." The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Leah helped Eliza gather supplies and spread the word among her contacts. Eliza spent hours in the kitchen, testing recipes and perfecting her techniques. The familiar rhythm of baking, the measuring, mixing, and kneading, was like therapy, each step a reminder of her skills and her passion. By the time Saturday arrived, Eliza had an array of baked goods ready: lemon tarts, chocolate chip cookies, honey almond cakes, and of course, her grandmother's cinnamon rolls. She packed them carefully into boxes, her nerves tingling with a mix of excitement and fear. The farmer's market was bustling when they arrived. Stalls lined the square, offering everything from fresh produce to handmade crafts. The air was filled with laughter, music, and the scent of freshly baked bread. Eliza's heart pounded as Leah led her to an empty stall. "This is it," Leah said, helping her set up. "Are you ready?" Eliza took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she arranged her pastries on the table. "I think so," she said. "No, I know so." As the morning wore on, people began to stop by her stall. Some were drawn by the enticing aroma, others by the neatly displayed treats. Eliza smiled shyly as she served them, her confidence growing with each compliment and delighted expression. "This is amazing," one woman said, biting into a cinnamon roll. "You made this yourself?" Eliza nodded, her cheeks flushing with pride. "Yes, it's my grandmother's recipe." The woman smiled warmly. "You've got a gift. I'll be back next week." The simple interaction left Eliza beaming. For the first time in years, she felt seen. Not as Marcus's wife, not as a victim, but as herself. It was liberating, exhilarating, and utterly transformative. By the end of the day, Eliza had sold nearly all of her baked goods. Leah helped her pack up the stall, her face glowing with pride. "You did it," she said. "I knew you could." As they drove back to the cabin, Eliza stared out the window, her mind racing. The day had been a success, but it was only the beginning. She knew Marcus wouldn't give up easily, and the road ahead would be far from smooth. But for the first time, she felt ready to face whatever came next. The shadows of her past might still loom, but they no longer defined her. She was carving out a new path, one step at a time. And with every step, she was reclaiming her life and herself, confronting the fear. The following week unfolded like a dream Eliza never knew she could have. Each day brought new challenges and small victories as she immersed herself in the world of baking and rediscovery. Her pastries, a testament to her passion, became a hit at the farmer's market. Word spread quickly, and customers began asking about her background, praising her skill, and inquiring if she had plans to open a shop. The attention was thrilling but terrifying. Eliza knew it wasn't just about baking anymore. She was reclaiming pieces of her identity, one pastry at a time. But as her confidence grew, so did the shadows of her past. Marcus's ominous threat. Asterisk, she can't hide forever. Asterisk lingered in her mind, a constant reminder that her newfound freedom wasn't guaranteed. Despite Leah's reassurances, Eliza found herself jumping at small sounds, her heart racing whenever a car approached the cabin. The fear of Marcus finding her was an invisible chain, keeping her from fully embracing her new life. One afternoon, as Eliza prepared for the next market, Leah walked into the cabin holding a stack of flyers. She set them down on the counter, her expression serious. "We need to talk," Leah said, her tone gentle but firm. Eliza set down the bowl of dough she was kneading and wiped her hands on a towel. "What's wrong?" she asked, her stomach tightening with unease. Leah unfolded one of the flyers and handed it to her. Eliza's breath caught in her throat as she read the bold letters. "Missing, Eliza Rainier." Below the headline was a recent photo of her, one Marcus must have taken without her knowledge. The text below the image painted her as a troubled woman who had suddenly disappeared from her husband's care. Eliza's hands trembled as she clutched the flyer. "He's looking for me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Leah placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I found these in town. He's trying to control the narrative, make it look like you're the one who's lost or unstable. But we know the truth, and so will others. The words were meant to comfort, but Elisa's fear only deepened. What if someone recognizes me at the market? She asked, her voice cracking. What if they call him? Leah's grip on her shoulder tightened. Then we deal with it, she said firmly. Elisa, you're not alone in this. Marcus is counting on you to be scared, to run and hide. But you're stronger than he thinks. You've already proven that. Elisa's mind swirled with doubts and fears. She had been building a fragile sense of safety and identity, but the flyer felt like a direct attack on everything she had worked for. For a moment, she considered giving up, canceling her plans for the market and retreating further into isolation. But as she stared at the flyer, a new feeling began to take root. Anger. How dare Marcus try to control her even now? How dare he twist the truth and paint himself as the victim? She had spent years letting him define her, but she wasn't that woman anymore. She couldn't be. Eliza took a deep breath and looked up at Leah, determination flickering in her eyes. I'm going to the market, she said. I'm not going to let him scare me into hiding. Leah's smile was small but full of pride. That's the Eliza I remember. The next day, Eliza arrived at the market with a renewed sense of purpose. She set up her stall with practiced efficiency, arranging her pastries with care. The crowd was even larger than the week before, and the familiar buzz of laughter and conversation filled the air. Customers began to arrive almost immediately, drawn by the scent of freshly baked goods. Eliza greeted them with a smile, her nervousness fading as she fell into the rhythm of serving and chatting. Each sale was a small victory, a reminder that she was capable of standing on her own. But as the morning wore on, she noticed something unsettling. A man stood at the edge of the market, his eyes scanning the crowd. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark coat that made him stand out among the cheerful shoppers. Elisa's stomach churned as she recognized him, one of Marcus's associates. Her hand shook as she handed a bag of cookies to a customer. She glanced around, searching for Leah, who was helping at a nearby stall. When their eyes met, Leah immediately understood something was wrong. She excused herself and made her way over to Eliza. He's here, Eliza whispered, her voice barely audible. Leah followed her gaze and spotted the man. Her expression hardened. Stay calm, she said. He hasn't seen you yet. We'll figure this out. But it was too late. The man's eyes locked onto Eliza, and his expression shifted to one of recognition. He began walking toward her stall, his movements deliberate. Eliza's heart raced, but Leah stepped in front of her, blocking the man's path. Can I help you? Leah asked, her voice cold and firm. The man stopped, his eyes narrowing. I'm looking for someone, he said. My boss's wife. She's gone missing, and he's worried about her. Leah didn't flinch. I don't know who you're talking about, she said evenly. And unless you're here to buy something, I suggest you move along. The man's jaw tightened. This isn't your business. Leah stepped closer, her tone turning icy. It is my business when you're harassing vendors at a public market. Leave, or I'll call security. The tension between them was palpable, but after a moment, the man relented. He cast one last glance at Eliza before turning and walking away, disappearing into the crowd. Eliza let out a shaky breath, her legs threatening to give out. Leah turned to her, her expression softening. Are you okay? I think so, Eliza said, though her voice was still trembling. What if he comes back? Leah's jaw tightened. Then we'll be ready. You're not alone in this, Eliza. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Eliza continued serving customers, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the encounter over and over. By the time the market ended, she was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. Back at the cabin, Eliza sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. Leah sat across from her, her expression filled with concern. You did great today, Leah said. You didn't let him win. Eliza nodded slowly, the events of the day still weighing on her. But he's not going to stop, is he? No, Leah admitted. But you're stronger than you think. And you have people who will stand by you. For the first time, Eliza allowed herself to believe it. The road ahead was uncertain, and the threat of Marcus loomed like a dark cloud. But as she looked around the cozy cabin and thought of the life she was building, she knew one thing for certain: she wasn't going back. No matter what Marcus tried, she was determined to reclaim her life. And no one could take that away from her. Breaking the chains. The evening in the cabin was quiet, but the tension in the air was palpable. Eliza sat in the living room, the soft glow of the lamp illuminating the stack of recipe cards she had spread across the coffee table. Her hands shook slightly as she traced the handwriting on the cards, a reminder of the life she was fighting to rebuild. The memory of Marcus's associate at the market loomed in her mind, a shadow over her fragile sense of safety. Leah was in the kitchen, her presence a comforting anchor. She had taken it upon herself to fortify the cabin, locking every window and door and setting up an old set of motion-sensitive lights she found in the shed. Eliza watched her move with a sense of gratitude that threatened to overwhelm her. Leah wasn't just a friend, she was a lifeline. "Do you think he'll come here?" Eliza finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Leah paused, turning to look at her. "I don't know," she admitted, her tone steady but serious. "But if he does, we'll be ready. You're not alone in this." Eliza nodded, though her stomach churned at the thought. The fear was real, but so was the anger, the simmering defiance that had been growing inside her since she left Marcus. She wasn't the same woman who had cowered under his control. She was stronger now, even if she didn't fully believe it yet. Leah joined her on the couch, handing her a cup of tea. "You know," Leah began, her voice softer now, "Marcus's associate showing up today means something." Eliza looked up, her brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "It means he's scared," Leah said simply. "He's losing control over you, and he doesn't know how to handle it. He's sending people to intimidate you because he knows he can't do it himself anymore." "That's a good thing, Eliza. It means you're winning." Eliza hadn't thought of it that way. The idea that Marcus might feel threatened by her newfound independence was both surprising and empowering. For so long, she had believed he was invincible, an immovable force in her life. But maybe Leah was right. Maybe his desperation was a sign that his grip on her was slipping. The thought bolstered her, even as a part of her remained cautious. She took a sip of her tea and looked down at the recipe cards. "I want to keep baking," she said, her voice firmer now. "Not just for the market, but for something bigger. I want to make it my life again." Leah's smile was warm and encouraging. "Then let's make it happen." The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Eliza threw herself into her baking with renewed determination, testing new recipes and perfecting old ones. Leah helped her research the permits and licenses she would need to start her own business, and together they brainstormed ideas for branding and marketing. The work was exhausting but exhilarating. For the first time in years, Eliza felt like she was working towards something that was entirely her own, a dream that Marcus could no longer take from her. But the shadow of Marcus still loomed. Eliza knew he wouldn't give up easily, and the thought of him finding her was a constant source of anxiety. Leah had contacted the local women's shelter to discuss legal options, including restraining orders and safe housing, but Eliza wasn't ready to take that step yet. For now, she focused on what she could control: her baking, her business, and her sense of self. One evening, as Eliza and Leah sat on the porch watching the sunset, Leah's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her expression darkening as she read the message. "What is it?" Eliza asked, her heart sinking. "It's Marcus," Leah said, showing her the message. It was short and to the point. "I know where you are." Eliza's breath caught, and a chill ran down her spine. How? How could he know? Leah shook her head. "He's bluffing," she said firmly. "He's trying to scare you. Don't let him." But Eliza wasn't convinced. The idea that Marcus might have found her safe haven was almost too much to bear. She stood abruptly, pacing the porch as panic threatened to take hold. What if he's not bluffing? She said, her voice rising. What if he shows up here? What if he tries to take me back? Leah stood and grabbed her by the shoulders, forcing her to stop and look at her. Eliza, listen to me, she said, her voice steady and calm. You've come too far to let him pull you back. He doesn't control you anymore. You are not the same woman who walked out of his house that night. You are stronger now. And no matter what he tries, you are not going back to him. Eliza's eyes brimmed with tears, but she nodded, letting Leah's words sink in. She wasn't the same woman anymore. She had faced her fears and taken steps toward reclaiming her life. And if Marcus came for her, she would face him too. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, her grandmother's recipe box in front of her. She opened it and pulled out a card she hadn't touched in years, a recipe for a cake her grandmother used to call the celebration cake. It was elaborate and time-consuming, but it was also a symbol of joy and triumph. Eliza decided to make it. She gathered the ingredients and began to bake, her hands moving with practiced precision. As the layers of the cake came together, she felt a sense of calm settle over her. This wasn't just a cake, it was a statement, a declaration that she wouldn't let fear dictate her life anymore. By the time the cake was finished, the sun was beginning to rise. Eliza stood back and admired her work, a small smile playing on her lips. It was beautiful, a masterpiece that reminded her of who she was and who she wanted to be. Leah walked into the kitchen, her hair mussed from sleep. She stopped in her tracks when she saw the cake. Wow, she said, her eyes wide. That's incredible. Eliza turned to her, a newfound determination in her eyes. I'm not running anymore, she said. If Marcus comes, I'll face him. But I'm not letting him take this away from me. Leah nodded, a proud smile spreading across her face. That's the Eliza I've been waiting for. The cake sat on the counter as the two women prepared for another day at the market. It wasn't just a dessert, it was a symbol of resilience, a testament to Eliza's strength. And as the day unfolded, Eliza knew that no matter what Marcus tried, she was ready. She had broken the chains of her past, and there was no going back. The stand. The morning light crept into the cabin as Eliza finished packing her baked goods for the farmer's market. The air was thick with tension, but also resolve. The message from Marcus was still fresh in her mind. I know where you are. But instead of fear, it had sparked something else in her, defiance. He might know where she was, but he didn't know who she had become. Leah entered the kitchen, already dressed and holding 2 mugs of coffee. She set one down in front of Eliza and gave her a steady look. You ready? She asked, her voice a mix of concern and determination. Eliza nodded, meeting her gaze. I'm ready, she said. And for the first time, she truly meant it. They loaded the car with trays of pastries and drove to the market. The drive was quiet, the tension palpable. Eliza stared out the window, watching the trees blur past. Her mind raced with possibilities of what the day could bring. But instead of dwelling on fear, she focused on the joy her baking brought to others and the satisfaction she felt in reclaiming her life. When they arrived, the market was already bustling. Eliza set up her stall with Leah's help, arranging her goods with care. The centerpiece was her celebration cake, a towering masterpiece that caught the attention of passers-by. She had written a small note to accompany it, a cake for new beginnings. The first customers arrived, and Eliza threw herself into the rhythm of serving and chatting. Each sale was a small victory, a reminder that she was capable of building something for herself. But as the morning wore on, a familiar unease settled over her. She felt eyes on her, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. She glanced around, her heart pounding, and froze when she saw him. Marcus stood at the edge of the market, his dark coat and imposing figure impossible to miss. His piercing gaze locked onto hers, and a cold smile spread across his face. He began to walk toward her stall, his movements slow and deliberate. Eliza, Leah whispered, her voice tense. He's here. I see him, Eliza said, her voice steady despite the fear swirling in her chest. She stood straighter, refusing to let him see her falter. I can handle this. Leah gave her a sharp look. Are you sure? Eliza nodded. I have to. Marcus reached the stall, his eyes sweeping over the display of pastries before settling on her. Hello, darling, he said, his voice dripping with false warmth. You've been busy. Eliza met his gaze, her heart pounding but her expression calm. What are you doing here, Marcus? She asked, her tone firm. I've been worried about you, he said, ignoring her question. You left without a word. I've been looking everywhere for you. I'm fine, Eliza replied, her voice steady. You don't need to worry about me anymore. Marcus's smile faltered, and a flicker of anger flashed in his eyes. You belong at home, Eliza. With me. Let's not make a scene. Leah stepped forward, her presence a protective barrier. She's not going anywhere with you, she said, her voice cold. You don't have any power here. Marcus ignored her, his focus solely on Eliza. Darling, he said, his voice softening in a way that had once made her believe him. You don't know what you're doing. This little hobby of yours, it's not real. Come home, and we'll forget all about this. The words stung, but they didn't break her. Eliza took a deep breath, drawing on every ounce of strength she had. This isn't a hobby, she said firmly. This is my life now. And I'm not going anywhere with you. Marcus's expression darkened, his calm veneer cracking. You're making a mistake, he said, his voice low and threatening. You don't know how hard it will be out here on your own. I've been on my own for a long time, Eliza shot back. I just didn't realize it until now. And I'd rather struggle and build something real than go back to being your prisoner. The words hung in the air, a bold declaration of freedom that left Marcus momentarily speechless. The crowd around them began to take notice, their curious glances turning into murmurs of concern. Leah stepped closer to Eliza, her presence a silent show of solidarity. Marcus's jaw tightened as he realized he was losing control of the situation. This isn't over, he said, his voice icy. You'll regret this. Eliza stood her ground, her heart racing, but her resolve unshaken. Maybe, she said, her voice steady. But I'll never regret leaving you. With a final glare, Marcus turned and stalked away, disappearing into the crowd. The tension in the air lingered, but Eliza felt an overwhelming sense of relief. She had faced him, and she hadn't faltered. Leah placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You did it, she said, her voice filled with pride. Eliza nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. I did. The rest of the day passed in a blur, but the encounter with Marcus stayed with her. As the market wound down, Eliza packed up her stall with Leah's help. The customers who had witnessed the confrontation offered words of support, their kindness a reminder that she wasn't alone. Back at the cabin, Eliza sat on the porch, the quiet of the forest wrapping around her like a comforting blanket. Leah joined her, handing her a cup of tea. You were amazing today, Leah said, her voice warm. Eliza smiled faintly, the weight of the day settling over her. I didn't think I could do it, she admitted. But when I saw him, I realized I had to. I couldn't let him win. Leah nodded. You've come so far, Eliza. He's not going to stop trying, but you've proven you can handle him. You're stronger than he'll ever be. Eliza looked out at the trees, the last rays of sunlight casting a golden glow over the landscape. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace, a peace that came from knowing she was no longer defined by fear. She had faced her past and stood her ground, and while the road ahead would still have challenges, she knew she could face them. Because she wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living. And that was something Marcus could never take away. Rebirth. The next morning dawned with a crisp chill in the air, the kind that signaled autumn was preparing to give way to winter. Eliza woke with a renewed sense of clarity. The confrontation with Marcus was behind her, but the scars of his control still lingered. Yet, for the first time, Those scars felt like badges of survival rather than wounds holding her back. She had faced him, and she had won, not because he had walked away, but because she had stood her ground. As the sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, Eliza prepared a fresh pot of coffee. Leah, still groggy from the events of the previous day, shuffled into the room, her hair a mess but her eyes filled with pride. "Good morning, warrior," Leah said with a teasing smile, reaching for a mug. Eliza chuckled softly. "Good morning, strategist. I don't think I could have done it without you." "You could have," Leah replied, her tone serious. "You just needed to believe you could. Yesterday wasn't just about standing up to Marcus. It was about proving to yourself that you don't need to be afraid of him anymore." The words resonated deeply with Eliza. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down at the table, her mind already racing with ideas for the day. She had another farmer's market to prepare for, but this time, she wanted to do more than just sell pastries. She wanted to share her story, to inspire others who might be trapped in their own invisible prisons. By mid-morning, the cabin was bustling with activity. Eliza and Leah worked together, creating an array of baked goods that would outshine anything she'd done before. There were the usual staples: cinnamon rolls, lemon tarts, and cookies, but Eliza also decided to showcase her celebration cake as a centerpiece, this time with an even bolder message: strength is sweet. As she worked, memories of her grandmother flooded her mind. She remembered the long afternoons spent in the bakery, her grandmother's laughter filling the air, as she taught Eliza the secrets of their family recipes. Those memories were no longer tinged with sadness or longing. Instead, they felt like a guiding light, reminding her of the person she was meant to be. By the time they arrived at the market, Eliza's nerves were replaced with determination. Her stall was impeccably arranged, the smell of fresh pastries drawing in customers almost immediately. But this time, Eliza wasn't just selling baked goods. She was sharing a part of herself. She had printed small cards with a brief message. "These pastries are more than just treats. They are a symbol of resilience, hope, and new beginnings. If you're facing something you think you can't overcome, remember, you are stronger than you know." She handed out the cards with each sale, her heart swelling with every kind word and grateful smile she received. Many customers lingered, asking about her story, and for the first time, Eliza found herself opening up. She didn't go into every detail, but she shared enough to let people know that her journey hadn't been easy, and that it was far from over. As the day went on, something remarkable happened. A young woman approached the stall, her eyes downcast and her movements hesitant. She picked up a lemon tart and read the small card that accompanied it. When she looked up, there were tears in her eyes. "Are these really your words?" the woman asked softly. Eliza nodded, her chest tightening. "They are. I've been where you are," she said gently. "But I promise it gets better. You just have to take the first step." The woman hesitated, then said, "I've been trying to leave my husband for months, but I keep telling myself I can't do it, that I'm not strong enough." "You are," Eliza said, her voice firm but kind. "I thought the same thing for years, but the truth is, the strength is already inside you. You just have to believe it." The woman nodded slowly, her expression shifting from despair to determination. She bought the tart and left with a quiet thank you. But Eliza could see the spark in her eyes. It was the same spark she had felt when she first realized she deserved more. As the market wound down, Eliza stood at her stall, looking out at the bustling square. She had sold almost everything, but what mattered more was the connection she had made. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. Her story, her pastries, and her courage had touched people, and that was worth more than any sale. Leah approached with a wide grin. "You were incredible today," she said. "I saw you talking to that woman earlier. She looked like she needed to hear what you had to say." Eliza smiled, a deep sense of satisfaction settling over her. "If I can help even one person feel less alone, then all of this is worth it." Back at the cabin that evening, Eliza and Leah sat by the fire, sipping tea and reflecting on the day. The warmth of the flames mirrored the warmth in Eliza's chest. She felt lighter, freer, and more certain of her path than ever before. "I've been thinking," Eliza said, breaking the comfortable silence. "It's time to take this to the next level." Leah raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I want to open my own bakery," Eliza said, her voice filled with conviction. "Not just to sell pastries, but to create a space where people can feel safe, where they can find hope and joy." Leah's face lit up. "That's an amazing idea. You'd be incredible at it." "I've spent so much of my life letting Marcus dictate who I am," Eliza continued. "It's time for me to define myself. This bakery, it won't just be a business. It'll be a celebration of freedom, of resilience." Leah nodded, her pride evident. "And I'll be right here to help you every step of the way." The months that followed were a whirlwind of planning, preparation, and hard work. Eliza found a small storefront in town, one with a cozy kitchen and a charming display area. With Leah's help, she renovated the space, pouring her heart into every detail. She named the bakery Second Chances, a tribute to her journey and the journeys of others who might find solace within its walls. On the day of the grand opening, the bakery was filled with friends, supporters, and curious townsfolk. The air was thick with the scent of sugar and spices, and the display cases were packed with Eliza's creations. The celebration cake took center stage, its message, "Strength is sweet," drawing smiles and nods of approval. As Eliza stood behind the counter, greeting customers and sharing her story, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. This was more than a bakery. It was a testament to her resilience, a symbol of her rebirth. She had taken the broken pieces of her life and turned them into something beautiful, something meaningful. And as she looked out at the crowd, her heart swelled with gratitude. She wasn't just living, she was thriving. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, she knew she could face them, because she was free. And freedom, she realized, was the sweetest thing of all.